If you've been paying any attention at all to, cultural cycles recently, the early 2000s are having this massive, messy moment.
Oh, absolutely. It's everywhere.
We're talking about the fashion, the attitude,
Yeah.
the whole vibe that has been, I guess, affectionately or maybe ironically dubbed indie sleaze.
It's all over social media. These club nights are popping up everywhere.
Exactly. But what we want to do today is look beneath the messy hair and the flash of the American Apparel ads. Because under all that, there was a really revolutionary and very brief period of digital culture.
A really specific moment in time.
Yeah, so today we are diving deep into the true soundtrack of that era. A sweaty neon rain of really musical anarchy known simply as Bloghouse.
It's arguably one of the most culturally significant, but at the same time, one of the most ephemeral musical movements of the last 20 years.
Right.
We're basically setting the clock between, say, 2006 and 2008. That's the sweet spot.
That's the moment when it all came together.
Yeah, it's the moment it coalesced into this global thing, united by the early web, and then almost as quickly as it appeared, it just dissolved.
Right, under the weight of its own success, really.
Pretty much.
So our mission today is to unpack this really intoxicating atmosphere and explore its sociological depth. This wasn't just music. It was a moment of true digital anarchy.
It really was.
You had this rapid discovery, musical cross-pollination, and this is the crucial part, a celebration of enthusiastic amateurism. It was all enabled by the architecture of the early internet.
And that element of amateurism is so key to understanding the sound,
How so?
Because Bloghouse wasn't strictly house music, not in the traditional sense. It was this chaotic proto-EDM adrenaline rush.
I love that description from one of our sources, that it was the sound of bands selling guitars and buying turntables.
It's perfect, isn't it? You had an indie band, you decided guitars were suddenly boring, so you bought a cheap synthesizer and a pair of decks, and boom, you were in the scene.
The undigested lunch of a generation.
Yeah, a generation trying to figure out if they were punks or if they were dancers. Maybe both.
And that distinction, that it was all driven by this attitude more than, say, technical perfection, that's what makes it so fascinating to look back on.
Absolutely. The whole genre was defined by an atmosphere, not some rigid sonic signature. It was a catch-all umbrella term. It could be anything.
So what would you hear at one of these nights?
I mean, you might hear this aggressive, distorted electro 1 minute, and then the next track would be this smooth, funky new disco thing.
And then it would just veer off completely.
Completely. Suddenly you're hearing garage punk rock. But the mood was always warm, goofy, open, and just fast-moving.
And the quality wasn't the point.
Not at all. The expectation of sonic perfection was super low. Amateurism was totally acceptable because the culture just prioritized speed. It was about discovery and novelty, not polish.
I think we need to establish, though, just how seriously this was all being taken at the highest levels of electronic music.
Yeah.
Despite those DIY roots. Because it feels so organic and chaotic. But was it actually recognized as a real force?
Oh, it absolutely was. Even by the godfathers of French electronic music.
You mean Daft Punk?
You don't have to look any further than Daft Punk's own catalog for that institutional confirmation. Their 2005 album, Human After All.
Which was so raw and repetitive.
Exactly. With its raw, distorted, repetitive loops, critics immediately labeled it dance punk or Bloghouse.
Okay.
And then, even more directly, their huge 2007 live album, Alive 2007.
A masterpiece.
Which basically captured the sound of that exact moment. It was dedicated, in the liner notes, to the Ed Banger sound.
It was the hardest, most recognizable strain of Bloghouse.
Precisely. That dedication basically cements it. It makes it a legitimate, recognized subgenre of house music, closely related to electro house and the bigger dance punk movement that was happening.
Okay, so that's where we need to start then, the foundations.
To really get how Bloghouse got that kind of recognition, we have to see that it was, standing on the shoulders of giants.
Or maybe punks who like to dance.
Exactly. It was really just the continuation of the early 2000s dance punk revival. Some people called it disco punk or new rave.
So it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was a revival of an idea.
It was. This second wave, our Bloghouse wave, basically went back and retroactively assigned the term dance punk to these first wave genres from the late 70s and early 80s.
Okay, so who are we talking about there?
We're talking about avant funk, new wave, post-punk bands. Think Liquid Gang of Four, ESG.
The classics.
And the core function of both of those ways, the original and the revival, was to grapple with this really profound inherent sonic tension.
And what was that tension exactly?
It was this attempt to reconcile two things that seem like total opposites.
Go ahead.
On one side, you've got the visceral emotional resilience and physical release of dance music, music that has its roots in Black and queer culture, music designed to heal and connect and celebrate the body.
And on the other side?
On the other, you have the angularity, the cynicism, the irony that you often associate with post-punk and indie rock.
The music of the intellect.
Right. Music obsessed with failure and critique. So dance punk, and by extension Bloghouse, just forced the visceral body and the cynical intellect to coexist on the same dance floor.
That sounds like a recipe for a great party, but also a deeply conflicted one.
It could be, yeah.
How did that cynicism translate when everyone was supposed to be, having fun? Didn't all that irony kind of dilute the feeling?
It definitely risked it, but the sound managed to walk this really fine line by just being undeniably kinetic. You had to move.
Right.
The cynical edge would often come through in the guitars. They were dry, angular, detached. It was like a structural critique of the groove itself.
While the groove is still happening.
Exactly. While the groove itself, the big bass lines and the driving drums, was providing all the emotional lift you needed, the music was sort of intellectually aware of its own absurdity, but physically it just demanded release.
And if we look at the U.S. side of that revival, the epicenter of all this conflict and synthesis it has to be New York.
Undeniably. And it was embodied by James Murphy and his label, DFA Records.
Murphy's story is so central to all this.
It's absolutely crucial. He was the ultimate scene outsider who somehow became the ultimate insider, a former indie punk, a self-confessed control freak.
A studio rat on the wrong side of 30, I think he called himself.
Yeah, and he had this almost encyclopedic obsessive knowledge of all this niche music history. And that knowledge, ironically, is what made him the ultimate tastemaker. He became the king of the hipsters for a whole new generation.
And he brought that hyper-aware self-critique right into the sound. His DJ sets are a perfect illustration of the whole DFA philosophy.
Which was defined by a glorious refusal to stick to the rules.
No genre boundaries, no blending rules.
None. He totally ignored the meticulous blending techniques that came out of the disco period. He opted for audacity, for conceptual shock value.
There's that famous story of him mixing Donna Summer and Hawkwind.
Yeah, one journalist cited a set where he moved seamlessly from the euphoric synthetic pulse of Donna Summer's I Feel Love,
a disco masterpiece,
and dropped it directly into the space rock grind of Hawkwind's Silver Machine.
Now that is a statement. That's not just mixing tracks, you're mixing entire ideologies there.
It's the shock of it. Putting high-gloss disco right next to this metallic, aggressive rock music.
It was so audacious.
It was a signal that the rules of categorization just didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the vibe and the energy.
And that ethos, that complete disregard for genre policing, is essential Bloghouse DNA.
It is. It's what allowed a producer in Italy to remix an American rapper or a French duo to remix a British rock band. No rules.
But the brilliance of his main project, LCD Sound System, that really lay in the internal friction. The music was so danceable, but the lyrics were a nervous breakdown set to a disco beat.
It was the sound of self-aware neurosis. You see it perfectly in a song like Losing My Edge.
I was there.
Exactly. Murphy just details all the anxieties of the aging hipster, proclaiming, I was there at all these hallowed touchstone events.
The first Can show, hanging out with Larry Levan at Paradise Garage.
All of it. And he's doing that while watching a younger, less informed generation just overtake him with their little jackets and borrowed nostalgia.
It's such a bitter paradox. He's celebrating the underground culture he loves, but at the same time, he's critiquing his own compromised position within it.
He was basically providing the scene's underlying anxiety, and the Bloghouse sound was providing the cure for that anxiety.
Which was the kinetic energy of the dance floor.
Just dance it out.
So while DFA was laying down that ethos in the U.S., the sheer volume and the raw energy of the sound was being dominated across the Atlantic by what became known as the French electro-duopoly, Ed Banger and Kitsune.
Their influence was colossal. It led to like 1 million imitators and, as our sources note, probably set back bitrate quality 1 million years.
Because of all the low-quality MP3s being shared.
That sacrifice of quality for speed was a defining feature. But while they dominated, their sounds were actually pretty distinct, almost like yin and yang.
Right, so you had Kitsune Maison, which was the slightly slicker, more melodic side of things?
They were kind of the gatekeepers of taste, you could say.
Right.
They specialized in these compilations that championed indie dance and new disco. The tracks were sophisticated, often built around these clean bass lines and sharp, polished production.
And the Daft Punk connection is there, too.
It is. The fact that Daft Punk's track Overnight was dedicated to Kitsune Maison shows they were seen as the curators of this new, evolving scene. They were focused on a fashionable, slightly warmer sound.
And then you had the total opposite end of that spectrum, Ed Banger.
Ed Banger was the true soundtrack of indie sleaze.
Yeah.
They represented the harder, more aggressive electro rock side. This was the label you associated with sweat and sleaze.
It carried over that raw posturing from the indie rock explosion.
Back directly. It was dirty, it was distorted, and it was purposefully punishing. And while some people felt Bloghouse wasn't exclusively French, you can't deny that the Ed Banger Kitsune duopoly provided the templates that basically everyone globally started to copy.
And we have a perfect example that shows that raw, almost anti-intellectual production prowess of the Ed Banger ethos.
Thomas Bangalter's remix.
Yeah, Thomas Bangalter, one half of Daft Punk, transforming DJ Matey's Signatune.
It's an incredible story of just minimalist genius. DJ Matey's original track was, as it was described, a sonic assault. It was dense, complex, full of this frantic energy.
And Bangalter just stripped it all back.
He showed restraint through extreme simplicity. He took the track, reduced it to this one raw loop, added just a solitary kick drum and some of those characteristic rollin' and scratchin'-esque skittering noises, and just stretched it across 6 minutes.
And that transformation turned the track into what was described as a dopamine lightning bolt.
Exactly. It was a tour de force of raw, stripped-down production that prioritized the dance floor's immediate visceral need for groove over any kind of complex musical structure.
It proved that genius in that era often just lay in finding the perfect loop.
And embracing noise and stripping away everything that felt unnecessary.
And that perfect raw loop was about to be heard everywhere because the internet was ready to globalize the sound instantly.
The Bloghouse moment is truly inseparable from the digital platforms that incubated it and then, spread it everywhere.
This was early Web 2.0.
The crucial period. And the entire infrastructure was basically built around MySpace.
Right.
MySpace was the primary platform for these musicians and, maybe more importantly, for their audience.
MySpace feels almost ancient now, doesn't it? A relic of a dial-up culture. But it was so fundamental to this scene exploding. Why MySpace specifically? What made it the engine for Bloghouse?
Well, MySpace was revolutionary in how it approached digital identity and user agency. Unlike the rigid, professionalized platforms we use today, MySpace allowed for tons of customization. You could alter the fonts, change your profile music, upload certain photos. You could redesign the whole space to reflect your identity.
So you're occupying what sociologists call flexible subjectivities.
Exactly. By changing your profile, you could try on an alternative subject position, different versions of yourself. Today, I'm a disco head. Tomorrow, I'm a post-punk revivalist. And you'd instantly feel connected to other people who shared that identity.
That customization sounds like it encouraged genuine expression and discovery. It's almost like building your own digital clubhouse.
It was. It prioritized user agency, and changing your profile was an act of community. You curated your top 8 friends, you chose a specific band's track to autoplay, you'd upload the messy photos you took the night before.
It's such a contrast to what came later.
A huge contrast. You think about later platforms like Facebook and Instagram, which brought in the age of the feed-based platform.
Right.
Those later feeds prioritized static images, rigid templates, and ultimately commercial signifiers. Identity became about consumption and presentation, not this fluid connection and experimentation.
So MySpace was the home base. But when it came to actually finding new music, the tracks that defined the moment, we have to talk about the aggregator that was basically the genre's nervous system.
Hype Machine.
Hype Machine.
Hype Machine was an absolute revelation. It solved this complex, two-sided platform problem.
Explain that.
Think of it this way. The internet had thousands of music blogs. You had bedroom commentators, specialized music critics, DJs, all posting their favorite tracks. But how do you sort through all of that?
It's impossible.
So Hype Machine crawled those thousands of blogs every day and created these influential charts based on which songs were being written about by the most individual or influential blogs.
So on one side, they needed enough small, passionate blogs to crawl to get meaningful, diverse data.
Correct. And on the second side, they needed users, you, to believe that those charts were a relevant source of quality content.
And once that happened, the artists got on board.
Exactly. The third critical member of the artists stepped in. Artists and their management quickly realized how powerful the platform was. They started using the hype machine charts as a source of pride, as promotion. They wanted to top that chart right alongside Billboard or iTunes.
So this basically institutionalized the DIY chaos.
It did. It legitimized amateurism and it legitimized speed. The best DJs and bedroom bootleggers of the era were, as one source put it, 2 parts fearless and 1 part idiot savant.
Huh, that's great.
They were instigating a global dialogue, often uploading tracks at the humble quality of 128 kilops.
So fidelity was just sacrificed for speed.
It was a deliberate trade-off. It was about rapid shared discovery. The culture prioritized being first to share something incredible over waiting for a technically perfect, commercially mastered track.
And the immediate result of this massive digital ecosystem was a global crossover effect that put the market for remixes on like steroids.
It was true. Chalk and cheese commingling. Disparate cultures were just colliding at 128 kiloBPs.
It allowed for this hybridization on a massive, unprecedented scale.
It proved that geography just didn't matter anymore. And the most famous example that perfectly illustrates this chaotic, globalized structure is the story behind Kid Cudi's Day and Night.
That song was an absolute monster. It
Yeah.
went massive. #2 in the UK, #3 on the US Billboard 100.
But it started as this moody, kind of melancholic rap track that didn't really fit the rap landscape at the time.
Right.
What truly catapulted it to global success was an unmastered remix by Crookers.
And who were they?
This duo, Fra and Bot, they were from a small town in Italy.
No way.
They found the track on MySpace, which is the most Bloghouse origin story you could possibly invent. Fra said he just messaged Kid Cudi, got the stems, and this is the key part, he never mastered the song.
Wait, so the global phenomenon version, the one everyone knows, was the unmastered bootleg made by 2 guys in Italy who just found the original track on a social media site.
Exactly. It was the unmastered version, and nobody really cared about the quality. And that perfectly sums up the priorities of the era.
That's incredible.
The fact that a duo from a small Italian town could turn a niche American rap song into a global hit by pulling an unmastered file off MySpace, it just shows you the raw, decentralized power of the Bloghouse internet.
It showed that the barrier to entry for global fame wasn't a studio budget anymore.
It was just the audacity to find a loop and press upload.
And this digital openness also started pulling in other, previously niche American regional sounds that were very much not Bloghouse.
Yes. Niche regional rap and club subgenres like Be More from Baltimore,
Baltimore Club, yeah.
and Hi-Fi from the Bay Area, and Snap from Atlanta, they suddenly started acting as a Trojan horse onto international airwaves.
Oh.
Because DJs in the Bloghouse scene were incorporating them into their sets and remixes. Tracks like Laffy Taffy and This Is Why I'm Hot were reaching ears globally, not through traditional channels, but through this digital network.
And when that raw, aggressive hip-hop and the distorted, sweaty Bloghouse collided, the results were just madness.
Total madness. You look at a track like Bounce by MSTR KRFT featuring the New York rappers NORE and ISIS.
Okay.
That track, a concentrated burst of punishing beats and braggadocious flow, it just exemplifies that collision. You have these electro-punk masters with gritty New York rappers, and it's all anchored by the ethos that was fueling the scene. All I do is party.
And this musical openness led to the genre influencing the biggest names in the mainstream.
Maybe most visibly and comically, Kanye West.
Right. Let's focus on that Kanye moment.
Yeah.
Our sources note he was famously incensed at an MTV Video Awards show in 2006.
He was.
When We Are Your Friends, which we'll talk more about later, beat his track Touch the Sky.
That moment, fueled by his characteristic anger and public meltdown, was pivotal. His anger was directed at this niche, day-glow world of Daft Punk hooks and Ed Banger aesthetics.
But his music changed after that.
His subsequent creative evolution shows he was paying attention. This aggressive electro-punk sound would clearly form the sonic backbone of his 2007 album, Graduation.
It just shows how porous the walls between these supposedly niche amateur scenes and the absolute mainstream had become.
And it was all thanks to the global conversation happening on the blogs. The Bloghouse internet made niche cool irresistible to the global stars.
So while the internet was providing the soundtrack and the global platform, the aesthetic that we now call indie sleaze, that was being supplied by one critical figure,
Mark Hunter.
famously known as the Cobra Snake.
Hunter basically visually codified the entire era. He defined the look: messy hair, smudged eyeliner, runny mascara, sweat-soaked band shirts.
And tons of colorful, basic American apparel clothing.
Exactly. But his methodology was the really revolutionary part.
So what was his origin story? How did he get started?
He started by just sneaking his camera into venues in Los Angeles, places like the Troubadour for bands like...
Yeah.
Yes, around 2004.
And crucially, he paid for his ticket like a normal fan.
Right, he maintained that punk DIY ethos, but instead of just shooting the band on stage, he'd turn the camera around on the crowd.
And the key, as we mentioned before with the music, was the speed of the sharing.
Absolutely. He would capture the crowd and then instantly upload the photos online, often the very next morning. This created a whole new kind of social clout.
Yeah.
If you were there, you wanted to be shot by the Cobra Snake, you wanted to see your photo on his site, it became a true portal to nightlife.
And it democratized access to fame.
That was the most significant move. No single image was given more importance than another. A photo of a random partygoer was featured right alongside Karen O or Steve Aoki.
That democratization fueled this idea that, hey, I can be famous just by being here and looking cool.
Exactly. And that aesthetic was fundamentally rooted in a punk DIY ethos that valued resourcefulness.
His look was accessible.
It was. The style relied heavily on thrifting. For instance, the skinny jeans that defined the era started as shrunken 80s thrift store jeans. It was. Broke culture was doable.
Right.
The style communicated this effortless cool without demanding a massive amount of money.
But this DIY broke culture ethos seems to run headlong into the commercial realities we touched on earlier. Wasn't this supposed underground scene actually heavily corporatized?
That is the essential contradiction of the whole era.
Okay.
The parties and the venues, they maintained this punk-kindy spirit. They were often in small bars or clubs with no cover charge. Yet these free events were frequently fueled by parties sponsored by major corporations.
Most notoriously, Toyota Scion.
Scion basically became an official sponsor of the burgeoning hipster movement. They could afford to host acts like The Strokes. It was this bizarre negotiation.
So corporations provided the funding for the party.
And the cool kids provided the aesthetic authenticity.
This complexity means that the consumers of this era, you, the listener, if you were part of this, were constantly engaged in this complicated negotiation of authenticity.
In a world where you knew the product was already compromised.
Right.
And that's the critical juncture. The scene signaled this major shift away from the rigid subcultures of the past, like goths or punks or metalheads, who define themselves through these really strict boundaries.
So how did the elite consumer define themselves in a world where everything felt compromised and genres were mixing so rapidly? What did that look like?
Through what sociologists call cultural omnivorousness.
Okay, what is that?
The elite consumer shifted to less hierarchical tastes. They were willing to embrace both high and low culture at the same time. You didn't just have to be a punk or a househead.
Your taste became expansive.
Right. It was, I like Guns N' Roses, and I like Tribe Called Quest, and I like The Cure and The Smiths. The question, what kind of music do you like, had effectively become this tedious, unanswerable question.
So was it just anything goes? A total rejection of categorization?
Not quite, and that's where the nuance really comes in. While they were tolerant of all this eclecticism, they were simultaneously engaged in what's called polypurism. This meant that they showed distinction not by truly adopting an anything-goes approach, but by choosing only what they decided were quality or authentic items within all those genres.
So they were still policing boundaries.
They were. They stayed strictly within the boundaries of the indie music stream, and they actively rejected commercialism and sonic homogeneity.
So to maintain your status, you couldn't just like any rap music.
No.
You had to, the niche regional stuff that Bloghouse DJs were spitting, hi-fi be more.
Right.
You could like dance music, but you had to reject the homogenized, big-budget commercial pop music of the era, say, the chart dominance of the Black Eyed Peas,
For sure.
in favor of the more angular, distorted Ed Banger sound.
That is the perfect distinction. They actively drew boundaries around the mainstream, especially commercial, pop, and dance, but they simultaneously spanned boundaries across experimental highbrow stuff and specific lowbrow regional sounds.
But always maintaining a preference for the innovative, the raw, the authentic.
It was a strategy of boundary policing. Their heterogeneous taste wouldn't lose its capacity to provide distinction because they were still the only ones who knew which tracks within that wider field were cool and which weren't.
It was about defining legitimate case through authenticity, even while you're embracing all this hybridity.
Exactly.
This sounds mentally exhausting, this constant negotiation, this tightrope walk between high and low culture, authenticity, and commercialism. Was irony the primary way of coping with this contradiction?
Irony was absolutely central. It served as a vital coping mechanism.
Okay.
It often masked what cultural theorists call the ugly feelings of the era: envy, irritation, paranoia, that all stemmed from the anxiety of living under late capitalism, where originality felt constantly compromised.
So the irony allowed them to claim some critical distance.
Exactly. I know this is compromised, but I'm enjoying it ironically.
And we keep circling back to LCD's sound system because James Murphy was the master of articulating this internal conflict.
He was. Murphy's music and lyrics, with their bittersweet paradoxes, the love-hate for nostalgia, the intense competition within the scene, the anxiety about originality, they were so compelling because you recognize yourself in those contradictions.
The irony was a defense mechanism.
A crucial defense mechanism in a world that was increasingly demanding emotional labor and authenticity from everyone.
If we look at the music itself, how did this anxiety, this tension between the cynical intellect and the visceral body, how did that translate sonically?
It created the unique texture of Bloghouse. The sound coexisted between the cerebral and the primitive.
Okay.
So dance punk and Bloghouse often used modernist features: minimalism, repetitive structures, angular guitars, which appeal to the rational mind and imply control.
But at the same time,
At the same time, they embraced the primitive or emotional through a prominent groove, syncopation, and what are called wetter sounds, like heavy reverb and delay.
why do wetter sounds equate to primitive or emotional? What does that mean?
It's about how the sound impacts you as a listener. A dry, angular guitar line feels intellectual. It kind of demands thought and critique.
Right.
But wetter sounds, heavy reverb, deep delay, massive bass, they tend to bypass your intellect. They emphasize the physical, the raw groove. When bands like Liquid Liquid or ESG used these sounds, they were perceived as more emotional and primal than the dry, detached angularity of post-punk.
And Bloghouse just fused them together.
It fused that intellectual distance with the primitive emotional release that you need for dancing. And that sonic paradox is what made the scene feel so intellectually relevant and, at the same time, physically undeniable.
Okay, before we get into the inevitable decline, we have to take a moment to celebrate the tracks that perfectly captured the pure, unadulterated energy of the moment.
We have to.
And we need to spotlight Switch's A Bit Patchy.
A Bit Patchy is the quintessential Bloghouse secret handshake.
Yes.
If you heard this track in a club, you knew you were in the right place. It's famous for being featured heavily in that Soulwax documentary, Part of the Weekend Never Dies. And it defined the sound that came to be known as fidget house. Goofy, squelchy, and just relentless.
And the track's name is a perfect example of that Bloghouse insider humor.
Absolutely. It's anchored by a legendary sample.
The unmistakable rhythm of Apache by the Incredible Bongo Band.
The source of the punny title. And Switch took that source material and just warped it into his signature style. Goofy, fidgety, and aggressively squelchy. It embodies that raw, unpolished, yet incredibly fun vibe that the whole community valued.
And then there is the high watermark, the track that unified the whole concept and exploded the sound globally.
Justice versus Simeon, We Are Your Friends.
An absolute anthem.
That track is Bloghouse refined to a perfect 4.5 minutes. It encapsulated all the best elements.
It was a remix of a rock song.
A Simeon rock song, yeah, done by Justice, which propelled both works to stardom. It took the electro-rock aggression of Ed Banger and fused it with this anthemic, almost euphoric hook.
And was a big enough crossover hit that, as we discussed, its video spurred Kanye West's award show meltdown in 2006.
It was undeniable. It pushed you in the chest and, as one source put it, all but bullies you into getting in on the fun.
But, as is the fate of all these explosive decentralized movements, the very success that created the scene was the catalyst for its decline. The Bloghouse moment was incredibly brief.
So brief. The success itself was the undoing. Everything that came after, say, mid-2008 was essentially the debris slide.
Right.
Once the key artists achieved massive commercial success, Crooker's remix of Day and Night sold 1 million copies, Justice was starring in feature films, the scene lost its underground cachet.
It lost that sense of shared proprietary discovery that fueled the blogs.
Exactly. It moved from anarchic discovery to a homogenized product.
So what were the specific mechanisms of that decline? What led to the era of big room EDM?
Several things happened really quickly. First, the key artists who had established that sound, like the members of Daft Punk or producers like Avicii, they began to retire or move on to more experimental, less commercial work.
And then the sound itself started to change.
Yeah, secondly, there was this rapid and aggressive trend toward homogenization in the sound. The market quickly shifted to EDM as hit singles.
How did that shift actually manifest in the clubs and the venues?
It manifested through the loss of the curated set.
Okay.
Bloghouse and early electronic music were defined by these long, genre-crossing DJ journeys. The DJ was a cultural guide, using their taste to move from disco to rock to techno.
But with the rise of the massive festival circuit and the focus on huge hit singles,
Promoters and venues began to demand homogenization. The emphasis was on the drop and the familiar chorus.
so the sound just became formulaic by commercial necessity.
Precisely. Tracks like Diplo and DJ Snake's Lean On marked that mile marker. It was a commercially perfect, massive hit, but it lacked the raw distortion, the fidgety chaos, and the specific sonic risk-taking that defined Bloghouse.
So the curated experience was replaced by the lowest common denominator.
It transformed that tight-knit community feeling into a widespread standardized party scene. And this commercialization just eroded all the countercultural aspects that originally made the scene feel resistant to conformity.
So if the original movement was about finding authenticity in anarchy, what does the current indie sleaze revival, which is fueled by platforms like TikTok, what does that represent?
It represents a deeply different phenomenon.
Okay.
The 2020s revival is a simulation. It's based on a retrospective pastiche of image-based aesthetics.
Right.
Unlike the original subculture, which, through MySpace, allowed for this flexible subjectivity and profile customization, it gave users genuine agency in how they presented themselves, the current landscape is entirely feed-based.
Meaning the focus is solely on the external image?
Correct. The hyper-focus now is on style and aesthetic as consumable products. The original subculture had an ironic subversion of hipster culture. They embraced thrift store looks out of necessity and irony. Today's revival instead valorizes consumable items, a specific makeup look, a particular branded outfit as the means of identity affiliation.
So your identification is contingent upon consumption rather than cultural taste or practice.
That's it, exactly.
So instead of being the sound of a generation's undigested lunch, the revival is just a carefully styled photograph of that lunch.
It's the difference between practice and presentation. The original scene was dirty, it was sweaty, and it was often uncool in its amateurism, but it fostered this dynamic cultural dialogue that was enabled by a decentralized web.
And today?
Today's revival is sleek, it's polished, and it's perfectly curated to maximize engagement on image-based platforms. The line between mainstream and counterculture is entirely erased, reflecting the process of aesthetic capitalism, where style becomes the dominant commodity within the mainstream.
So Bloghouse was a definitive, weird, and glorious moment, a brief nexus where early digital culture collided with dance floor hedonism, and it created this global musical anarchy.
It really did.
It valued fun and raw experimentation over polished perfection, and it united these disparate sounds from cynical New York art punks to audacious Italian bootleggers.
And in its very structure, its embrace of irony, its negotiation of compromised authenticity, and its swift commodification, Bloghouse was the perfect product of its time.
Right.
It constantly negotiated the anti-hipster paradox, claiming to be cooler and more authentic than the mainstream, but using its own knowledge and sophisticated taste as a form of social and cultural capital.
It was resistance that almost instantly became a commodity.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the core sociological question. If, as theory suggests, modern capitalism has reached a stage where it preempts and formats all desires for resistance.
Meaning that every gesture of rebellion is already packaged and ready for sale before it even hits the street.
Right. If that's the case, does the current indie sleaze revival offer any genuine political or cultural potential beyond just mere nostalgia? Or is it simply an endless, profitable repetition of older, cooler gestures designed ultimately to sell products?
It's a simulation of resistance.
It is, and we have to ask if that simulation can ever truly break the system that created it. That's something for you to chew on as you curate your next aesthetic.